This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. Hi, I'm Raghu Marcus. Well, I had heard about Delhi Belly, but I never knew that you could actually have projectile waste coming from two orifices at once. As soon as I recovered from dysentery, I contracted hepatitis. So in my first month in India, I contracted two deadly diseases. Talk about forced purification. So while recouping near the ashram, I waited for word from Ram Dass that he had found his guru, but nothing yet. Then I started to feel a little bit more human, and it was arranged that I could have a short visit with the mother of the ashram, again simply called Mother. She was very old, I had heard, and had some sort of motor control muscle disease. And I wondered to myself, geez, it'd be terrible if all I saw was this decrepit old body instead of a holy woman. But off I went, and as I entered her room, she contacted me with her eyes, and all I could feel was a tremendous force field. Suddenly, time and space stopped. I sat in front of her, and for a few brief moments, I had no thoughts and no fear, just a deep feeling of peace and restfulness. Now I recognized in me at that moment what Ram Dass had been talking about. But it was time to keep moving, as I finally heard from Ram Dass that he was going to be at the ashram of Swami Muktananda, who had visited the U.S. and whom Ram Dass had spent time touring with. I arrived a couple of days before Ram Dass and was having what was called darshan of the Swami. Everyone was touching his feet, but I just felt so weird about that. When Ram Dass finally arrived, I asked him about it. He said it was just the God in me acknowledging the God in the Swami. Well, no dice on that one. It just felt forced and dumb. Ram Dass had other news, though. Maharaji, his guru, was found and was staying in an ashram in the foothills of the Himalayas. Finally, the goal was in sight, and I could meet the guru and then go back home.
Now, again, and then he said things like, you went to Amarnath Cave. Yeah, but you were perplexed. It didn't mean much to you, did it? No. A few nights later, I was in my room, and I thought, gee, one of these days I'll have to take a bus and go over and see Lama Govinda, because he's nearby, and we dedicated our book to him, and he's a very beautiful man, and I ought to pay a visit to him. Next morning at 8 o'clock, there's a car and a chauffeur. The guru says you're to go see Lama Govinda. Now, that is we're going to just say one more thing and then let's take a coffee break. What I experienced at that time of meeting that man, in fact, within those first few minutes of meeting him, was the experience of surrender, which was no surrender. In other words, I didn't begrudgingly give up my ego. It was as if I came home to the place where I no longer needed it. There was never at any time a specific contract entered into where they said, do you want to stay? Do you want to be trained? Do you want anything? It just all happened because we all knew it was supposed to happen. They took over my complete life at that point. I didn't leave that temple again except to go to Delhi once, which I'll tell you about later, for 7 months. When I left, I came back here to the United States for a trial run, so to speak, for some work here, sadhana here. They took over my food, my clothing, my training, everything. Never anybody asked or said. It was all done from then on from inside. I learned about what inside education is about, and we'll talk about that after the coffee break. But the point I want to press home is that as a Westerner, the concept of surrender had been very unpalatable to me, because it was ego surrender, and ego meant giving up to somebody else. It was like a power struggle that you lost. And this man was at the place where there was no other person you were giving up to. I can't get too close to this yet until I tell you more things, but I can give you the feeling for it now. And everything I did from then on was done with absolute joy. There was no thing they could ask of me that was too hard. It was austerities that were not austere, no matter what it was. Tapas that was certainly not in any way difficult to do, because I was living almost within this man. For the first time, I understood what the concept of a guru was about. You see, a guru is your doorway to God, your doorway to the beyond. A guru is not just a groovy teacher. You know, it's not a pundit. It's not just a wise man who can teach you things. A guru is a spiritual vehicle, an entranceway. He's a pure mirror. He isn't anybody at all. There is a paragraph that is the last thing that René Daumal wrote in Mount Analog, which is very appropriate at this moment. He didn't finish the book, he died, but he had notes for the end of it that his wife had included in the book, and this was the last note he had written. By our calculations, thinking of nothing else, by our desires, abandoning all other hopes, by our efforts, renouncing all bodily comforts, we managed to gain entrance into this new world. So it seemed to us. But we learned later that if we were able to approach Mount Analog, it was because the invisible doors of that invisible country had been opened to us by those who guard them. The cock crowing in the milky dawn thinks that its call raises the sun. The child howling in the closed room thinks that its cry opens the door. But son and mother follow courses set by their own beings. Those who see us, even though we cannot see them, open the door in answer to our puerile calculations, our unsteady desires, and our awkward efforts with a generous welcome. And that's much more the way the universe really is. And just to reflect upon as you sip your coffee, let me say, as it turned out later, Bhagwan Das had been meditating in a monastery prior to going to Kathmandu, had just left Kathmandu, and he got an internal message to go to Kathmandu. And as it turned out later, I found out that the Guru had sent for me. That's fun, isn't it? Enjoy your coffee. We'll commence again in 15 minutes. What has been said thus far is, from one way of looking at it, an introduction. From perhaps another level of looking at it, it is that which I truly have to offer you. Because what I will talk about from now on is what happened after I stayed at the temple, what training I received, what they taught me, and how, what I learned about what is that state of consciousness that the guru is in, and so on. And all of that is meaningful to, you can really only hear it when you share with me a very firm faith. And the first part of this afternoon was really to convey to you the way in which my own faith evolved. Part and parcel of Western ways of thinking that almost are built into the way in which one tests the null hypothesis in science is a type of cynicism. And it is just that type of cynicism of, I don't believe it, show me, that closes all these doors to us in the West. We feel we're going to be conned if we allow ourselves to have this irresponsible emotional faith that we can't justify to a hard-headed scientist. And it's really only by telling that story that I know how to convey to you that which is really unlabelable other than by implication. Because what I evolved, it's interesting, as I was going to leave India, the Guru had said to me, is there something you want? And I thought about it for a number of weeks, and I came back and I said to him, the only thing I can think that I want is not to lose faith. Because as long as, no matter how bad it gets, I know of this possibility, I have that faith to keep struggling to pursue my sadhana. And that's a very ephemeral thing to convey to another human being, is faith to be able to do the work. See, all of you know everything you need to know to do a lot on yourselves. But many of you doubt too much whether or not A, you can do it, B, whether it'll pay off, C, whether there's any payoff really there at all, or is it just kind of mushy-headed thinking on a pack of hallucinating romantics? Not you people don't think that so much, but we Western consciousness think that, the rational mind. Because this system that we're going to be dealing with is, in large part, meta to the rational system. Superior to it, above it, beyond it, behind it, inside of it. And a system cannot look at something outside of itself, that's by definition. And since we only know the world as we know it through our rational minds and our senses, that which is available to us other ways we tend to reject. And we tend, in order to reject it, to attach a certain kind of emotional rejection to it. I mean, we have a self-righteous cynicism that we apply. William James, in his Varieties of Religious Experience, said, and I think I can quote, it's a very famous paragraph, he said, our normal waking consciousness is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie other consciousnesses, other forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without ever suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch, they are all there in their entirety. Different types of mentality, which probably somewhere have their field of application or adaptation. No account of the universe can be total, which leaves these other types of consciousness quite disregarded. But how to regard them is the question, for they are so discontinuous with our normal consciousness. They may determine our attitudes, though they fail to furnish formulas. They may open a region, though they do not give a map. At any rate, they forbid the premature closing of our accounts with reality. And that was as close as he would come. It was right at that cusp between science and what we call the mystical. And all he said was, don't throw it out too fast. Keep the door open. I was just asked to review a book for the Journal of Contemporary Psychology. And it was called Trance and Possession States. It was a book of, it was a symposium from the Buck Memorial work in Canada. Very interesting, very interesting. For the most part, it was a type of reductionistic endeavor of explaining away all of the possession states and trance states in terms of clinical pathology. The anthropologists could be free of it because they have the delightful occupation of merely pointing, saying, wow, look at that, look at that. They don't have to put it down as the theoretician does, or the psychologist. And the religious people in there were all mainly Western religios who were explaining it away, saying we need a greater psychology of religion, by which they mean the way in which personality is involved with religion, which has nothing whatsoever to do with the spirit. But that paragraph from William James was at the end of one of the articles, which was one of the better articles, and it struck me as humorous that the quote was there, although the whole rest of the book was as if a complete denial of the meaning of that quote. And so, even in order to be, you see, I read the books that I'm now working with in my own training 5 years ago. And I knew them well enough to give lectures on them. I mean, I intellectually understood them, the theory behind them. But they meant nothing to me. They were just as if they had been written in another language. When I read them now, yeah, right. That's what it means. That's what oh, that's that feeling. Oh, yeah, right. Because now I was open in that way. I had said, all right, I won't be a Western social scientist anymore. I'll be an Eastern scientist. I'll study the science of yoga. I'll go the whole trip. Who knows where it'll come out? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Mr. Irwin pointed out to me that maybe my last remark before the coffee break could have been misconstrued in the view of the fact that I suggested that since my guru had sent for me, maybe I was merely on a messianic trip. He didn't say that. I interpreted that. When I light the incense at the beginning of our meeting, I reverence and invoke the Guru. Now, it's hard for anybody that is sitting in the audience holding tightly to their Western cynicism to understand when I say that there is literally no me of any significance left, and that I am specifically a vehicle through which he is working, and that I know that, and I just don't surmise it. I know that. And therefore, what I do when I come up here is literally go on automatic. I'm merely a rent-a-robot. And I haven't any idea what the game is involved. Maybe his whole life and my whole life was in order to be able to say one word which will be the clue for one of you to use, and that was the meaning of it all. Who knows? And you're the one. What is the one? It's a continuous cycle. We're all becoming more conscious. We're all at different points in the cycle. And to get hung up in one's individual social identity and social role is an attachment that we can ill afford. We can ill afford. Now, the actual teaching that I was subjected to at the temple was not presented by the Guru. I saw very little of him. It was taught to me by another jungle sadhu, jungle holy man, extraordinary person. My teacher he's about 50 years old. He left home and he went into the jungle at about 8 years old. He's a Brahmin. He's of the priestly caste in India. Very pure man, very pure man. There's certain unusual qualities about him, to say the least. First, he's silent. He's mauna. He's been silent for 15 years. So all the teaching was done by chalkboard, which is kind of a cop-out, but it's all right. I mean, it's different than using the energy directly. And I was silent all the time I was at the temple. For all those months, I was using the chalkboard also. Extraordinary discipline. He reads and writes about 8 languages, different languages, not dialects, languages. Has had no formal schooling that I know of. Very erudite person. Taught me in English, beautiful English. The many grustas, householders, come and they give money to the Guru. And this money is often used to build temples. And my teacher is the person who architecturally designs all the temples, hires all the help, buys all the materials, supervises all the building, pays all the help, runs all the temples, did all the teaching of me, has many devotees of his own, sleeps 2 hours a night. He weighs 90 pounds. His total food intake for 15 years has been 2 glasses of milk a day. Right? According to the World Health Organization, he's dead. Very unusual fellow. Has many powers, many powers. Yeah, he undertook my training through, I don't know how it was arranged, but there he was teaching me. And it was many months before I understood that what he was teaching me was a highly traditional, highly systematic, highly formal body of knowledge. Because he taught it so exquisitely that he taught it from inside me. It was very much like a lotus unfolding. It was as if he would lead me to ask, to wonder the next thing, and just as I would wonder, there he would be handing me the answer. So it was this most unusual feeling I had that it was all coming out of me, I was learning it all myself, and that it was completely tailored to me, and it had nothing to do with any system. And then I could come back and I could pick up one of these books on Ashtanga Yoga, and I could read them, and they're practically direct statements of the things I was learning. It taught me a lot about education, a thing of which I had been a professor for a number of years. The basis of the teaching, Ashtanga Yoga or Raja Yoga, is really an eclectic type of yoga. It's everything but the kitchen sink. You go all methods at once in order to reach enlightenment. And it's systematically, Ashtanga means 8 limbs, 8-limbed yoga. The basic approach is to purify the body and purify the thought process, to then bring the thought process down to single-pointedness of mind, such as any meditation does. At the same time, to learn how to work with, mobilize, and direct and control the energy within the system, in the body. And then to put the energy through that one-pointed thing like a laser beam and then turn the whole thing back on itself. That's the process. Now, when I used to wonder when I took drugs why I came down, see, after the guru swallowed all that acid, it as if I sort of lost interest in drugs. I am deeply appreciative of what they have done for me. I would like to be able to take LSD every 6 months or a year to see where it's and I am at in relation to one another and what I can remember that I had forgotten. My guru never has told me not to do anything, nor has my teacher, just as they never required any contract from me. It was up to me. It's my journey. Each person's on his own journey. We can only be there for one another, and each person hears what he can hear and does what he can do. And any time you have to do it because somebody made you agree to do it, you can be sure that the motivation is not sufficient to be able to do austerities that are not austere. The first limb of this yoga is called yama. It's mainly purification, but it's got a lot of things that we Westerners have got to re-examine, and it helps us a lot, I think. There are some of them which are complex, and we're not going into many of them in any detail. I'm going to give you just a survey of the feeling of what it's all about and how I understand what's happening in Western terms. The 5 of these in yama, there are 5 subdivisions, is non-killing, non-stealing, or taking that which is property of others, truthfulness, not lying, not receiving of gifts, that is not taking something for one's own enjoyment. It's something to do with possessions. and brahmachari, which means continence. Now, when Bhagwan Das, this vital, vibrant 23-year-old Westerner, first said to me, well, you know, I'm brahmachari, and probably you'll want to become so too. The thought appalled me, as it does most Westerners. We have just gotten to our new experience of sexual freedom. Sex is just coming of age as an open matter. And it is a very hard matter for a Westerner to consider the idea of suspending his external sexual activities in order to pursue his yoga. So I just laughed because sex was one of the very important things of my life, all kinds, all kinds. I think I had, partly for neurosis and partly just for psychology and partly just because I was a tremendous sensualist and partly because I was a Freudian and partly for many reasons, I had to try everything, lots. Every, what would be called normal and perverse form of sex.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and raamdaas.org. We appreciate all the support for the foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to raamdaas.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and raamdaas.org. Hi, I'm Raghu Marcus. So after 5 months in India, I finally arrived in the foothills of the Himalayas on a late spring day, wondering what in the world was in store for me. Ram Dass had said, nobody can meet the Guru, and if you do meet him, you meet him for a day. Well, I thought I'd meet him and then return home, mission accomplished. I'd finally experienced what Ram Dass had been speaking about in America. The night before I was to take the bus to the temple where I could meet Maharaji, I met another Westerner, a young woman who I knew from Montreal. She was the girlfriend of a DJ I had hired at the radio station and had traveled to India looking for adventure and somehow found out Maharaji's whereabouts. I was amazed because she had never shown any interest in spirituality. Well, next day we went to meet the Guru, amazing temple nestled in a valley in the mountains, with a streaming river running by it. I sat with a few Westerners I had met the night before, including the woman from Montreal. Suddenly, the doors to his room burst open, and to my astonishment, I realized I knew him. I knew him because whatever I felt from Ram Dass, he was the source. And it was beyond what my experience could categorize. But mostly it was a feeling of being home for the first time. I dove at those feet. It wasn't even a thought in my mind. I later thought about it and, wow, I was so screwed up in my head about this with that Swami. And this was like not even a thought. Anyhow, then he looked at me and at the young woman from Montreal and said, through a translator, "Friends from Canada?" And then time stopped in its tracks. It was as if we had been sitting there for a month. I noticed the space, the very ethers were enveloping my entire being. And I remember thinking, this is the unconditional love that Ram Dass talked about. He wasn't bullshitting. This was real.
And what they said to me at the time was, well, all right, don't give it up if you can't. Later, everything will be possible. Now it's important for you to work with that energy. That's all they said. And I, in my sophisticated Western sense, said, well, what about Tantra? How about tantric sex? And they said, well, that isn't part of this particular yoga. We'll have to explore that independently. I have since thought a great deal about Tantra and talked with many people who are using Tantra. Tantra is very simply, it's a much broader thing than sexual Tantra. Tantra is merely the process of using anything external that is available through your senses to go beyond it. That's all. This is Tantra. Using a mala is Tantra. The guru external to myself is Tantra. Anything external to yourself that you use is Tantra. So when you use another woman, another person, a woman or your sexual partner, to work through the sexual relationship to go beyond it, that is a tantric method. Now the problem with Tantra is that there is a very grave risk of getting trapped in your method. And you'll see that this is particularly difficult as we talk on when you're dealing with the desires that are the strongest. Because the whole matter of enlightenment that is required is what is called renunciation. But when you think of the word renunciation, many of you think in terms of people living off in the woods, having like Milarepa or something like that. Well, that's an external manifestation of renunciation. Renunciation very simply means not the renunciation of action, but the renunciation of the desire. Right? It doesn't matter what you do, it's how much you're attached in doing it. That's what the critical issue is. You can live like a Westerner. If Maharishi Mahesh wants to stay at the Hilton, it's cool, as long as Maharishi Mahesh doesn't give a damn about staying at the Hilton. If he would be just as happy in a hut, he can perfectly well stay at the Hilton. And if he can't be just as happy in a hut, he maybe can't afford to stay at the Hilton. Spiritually can't afford it. See, and that's the measure. Each person has to look at for himself as to where he is. An internal matter. It has nothing to do with there's no external way. You can have a person living in the jungle looking like a renunciate, and he's completely attached to the model he has of being a renunciate. And what is so seductive is that most of the yogas have a trap in them that one becomes attached to one's yoga. One becomes attached to one's vehicle. Now in India, it's an interesting thing. When you are very much caught in nature, it's said you are at the mercy of the gunas, the various aspects of nature, and you are bound by an iron chain. And when you have finally managed to separate yourself from tamas, which is ignorance and darkness, the forces of darkness, and rajas, which is the forces of action and high energy, and you become a very sattvic person, meaning a very pure person, working towards enlightenment. So all the desires that are left are the desires to become enlightened. Then you are attached by what's called the golden chain. And the statement is that a golden chain is certainly nicer than an iron chain, but baby, it's still a chain. And finally, you have to even give up being a good guy seeking enlightenment. You see? You have to give up all of your vehicles, all of your models, all of your desire, all of your attachments, all the way along. But it has nothing to do with your external behavior. You might get that, work with that, because it's a very critical point. Now, to say a little more about the brahmachari first. I finally did adopt continence, which I would like to point out that brahmachari is quite different from celibacy. Because it is one thing to merely turn off overt sexual acts. And you can live out your fantasies or store up your energies or something like that, sublimate, displace, something like that. Brahmachari is the process of taking energy that is existing in the body in the form of what is called bindu, which is a form of energy that is used in sexual behavior. And through a process you work at in your body to convert that energy into a finer type of energy that is used in spiritual work, which is called ojas. And so the conversion is from bindu to ojas. And it is a process that many of you recognize involves pranayama, it involves kundalini, it involves working with the spine and opening up the sushumna, the thing inside the spine. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we come to pranayama. However, the difference is you're not just stopping sex, you're redirecting the sexual energy, and the experience is certainly highly parallel to much of what you reach for when you go towards a sexual experience. And the part that finally awes you is to appreciate the fact that all the time I was reaching through the motorcycle, through the airplane, through my sexual partner, through power, through fame, through any of those things, for that feeling inside myself, that feeling which we can call fulfillment, the feeling of it's all right, the feeling of yeah or wow, or the feeling of contentment, the feeling of bliss, feeling of ananda, bliss. That feeling, all of it, even though I use those external things to start the process, they were my yoga, that feeling came from the same place inside, always. Always. Somebody gives you a big job and they say, well, you must be pretty good, and you feel that great feeling, that's that place. There's an ego thing that got you there, but it's the place, that's that place. You just have your moment of orgasm and oh, yeah, you've merged and it's a unitive thing, and you look at the other person and you say, I love you. It's just like looking at your mala and saying, I love you. It was a vehicle that got you to that place. And then when you begin to understand that that is the case, that all those places are the same place, and that it's a place inside you, then you say, well now, isn't there a direct method of going to that place and staying there? And then you start to understand what brahmachari is. Because this whole process is a process of residing in that place all the time. I must explain to you that when you really understand where my guru is in what's called sahaja samadhi, that means he is in a fully realized state all the time. Now I'll tell you exactly where he is. If you are making love to somebody, sexual love, and you are very relaxed and it's a very beautiful experience and you get very close, and as you approach the moment of orgasm, there is a merging experience, so that instead of being her and me, or, you know, the other person and the self, there's just the experience. And there are so many arms maybe and so many legs, but even those may be gone, and there's just the feeling of the experience, and both people are merged in that place. Right? And if your sex is particularly good, you are in that place and you try to maintain that place, because that's the highest peak. It's the blissful union, the yin-yang merger. The polarities have come together. If at that place you pull your head back from your beloved to look at your beloved, in other words, you go back into the polarity to love the beloved as a separate entity, only to go back into the merger. You understand that place where you just keep going, Like, it's just that's where he lives. That's where he lives. His beloved is God. And he goes right in and out of that little place. It's just like, but it's like at the rate of breathing. The rate of breathing. It's going into the union, back to the duality, back into form, form to formless, back to form. Right at that edge. Right at that edge. He just comes back into form enough, keeps the body going, and it comes back to worship. Comes back to worship. See? Okay. I want to make the parallels between the sexual gratifications, which are usually genital sexual, but in Westerners that are very sophisticated and have worked much on opening themselves up sexually, gets so that it is not any longer genital sexuality, but total in the Freudian sense of everything becomes sexual, erogenous zone. The whole body and the whole mind becomes an erogenous zone, one large erogenous zone, and people are just merged in a sexual union. Well, that place is the place we're talking about. I used to kid. I didn't understand, you see, before I went to India. I remember giving a lecture, and I remember saying, you know, there are some of these yogis in India who go sit in a mountain and they sit cross-legged and you feel, poor guys, there they are all alone. But man, they're just like in orgasm all the time. And everybody laughed and I laughed and it was all very funny because I didn't believe it. Now that I know how Shakti and Shiva merge through Kundalini, and now I know it from inside, now it's quite a different matter. Quite a different matter. All right, in pranayama, I'll talk more about what you do about the sexual energies. Let me just deal with the other things in yama. Now, the implication of non-killing is interesting because I wear leather sandals, but these leather sandals come from the Gandhi ashram in Delhi, which are made from cows that died naturally. See? Every time a cow dies on the street, they call up the Gandhi ashram and they send a truck over and they take it and they make sandals out of it for nuts like me. And it's like my teachers, the way he started to teach me about this, he wrote on his slate, snakes know heart. Meaning, when you're pure of heart, when you don't mean harm to anything, you don't have to worry about snakes because they are appreciative of where you're at, right? They won't do you in unless they feel a threat from you. And that is the reason why part of the reason why I am on the diet I am on, which is a vegetarian diet. Because they feel, and I do what I'm told, but they feel that since you are what you eat, and since the cells of animals that die violently have all the chemicals that are released at the time of violent death, fear and anxiety and so on, that this does affect the constituency, the components, the composition of your cellular body, and as your consciousness gets finer and finer, then what you are made up of is your environment in which that consciousness is dwelling. It's the temple in which you are living. And if that temple is full of those kinds of vibrations, it's at a much finer level of energy than gross body level, the finer level of energy, if your body is made up of that, it's going to bring you down, it's going to catch you up, it's going to create a bad environment in which to work. Non-killing, non-stealing, and non-receiving of gifts, there's another element to them that's very interesting, which is very relevant here in the West. And that is the degree into which, and truth is part of it also, the degree to which one sees any other individual as object in relation to oneself. That the polarities that we exist in the West have gotten to be such that we create our polar opposite all the time. I know many of you will feel uncomfortable when I say this, But the hippies create the police as much as the police create the hippies. That the liberals create the conservatives. The protesters create the John Birchers just as much as the John Birchers create the protesters. That as long as you are attached to whatever pole you are representing, the vibrations which you are sending out are creating its polar opposite around you. If you can do whatever is your karma, which may be walking in a protest march or fighting in Vietnam or being a conservative or a liberal or being a housewife or being a yogi, and can do it without attachment and do it fully and thoroughly but without attachment, then you do not create that karma. You do not create the polar opposite. And therefore, what they are saying is that if that certain acts have in them the implicit recognition of treating other people as object, when you steal from somebody else, when you harm somebody else, because you're harming yourself. But the key one that we Westerners have to explore is the one of truthfulness. Because I realized finally that there was nowhere to hide, that I could not afford any longer not to tell the truth. That the subtle kind of deception that we impose upon ourselves had to go. Had to go. I've got a new routine now. When people come to visit me up at my cabin up in New Hampshire, I say to them, I'm not interested in social visits if we're working together, and I demand in this situation total truth. And I say, is there anything you can think of that you can't tell me? Anything you can think of. It's like, don't think of rhinoceros. Is there anything you can think of that you can't tell me? Well, one guy thinks I look like an ape, so he doesn't want to tell me that. Another guy's got some sexual hang-up. He doesn't want to tell me that. I say, well, if you can't trust me enough to share all that with me, if you think I'm still at the place where I'm going to hurt you or you feel hurtable, then we're not ready to work together. Now, the implications of that are this. Sounds like John Kennedy. I want to say this about that. That just like I said at the outset of the lecture, the geese do not mean to cast their image, nor the water to receive their reflection, nor the water to receive their image. When somebody visits me, I am being the witness, that place which is independent of personality and individual difference, and I am trying to make contact with that place and that other person. And at that place, there is no game involved. There's nothing he can do to me or I can do to him. That was the place I went to in that session. How can you hurt me? Kill my body? That's your karma, not mine. Truthfulness is perhaps one of the most profound ones for the Westerners to understand, because our level of paranoia is so deep-seated, so profound. You know, when I went to India, I couldn't believe those people were really existing. In the villages, they are so pure. They are really so pure. Like somebody would walk 10 miles out to the temple to bring me some fruit, just because they wanted me to have it. And what would I do as a Westerner? I'd think, well, what's in it for them? What do they want from me? I couldn't accept the fact that a person could be doing that pure an act just out of a feeling of wanting to do it. And when I first read the Ramayana, the story of Raam, it was at a time, a yuga, when things were much purer, not the Kali Yuga we're living in now, that he was an incarnation in the Sat Yuga. And his life is such a reflection of purity that I would cry at such purity, because I had never met anybody that pure. I couldn't even conceive of anybody being that pure. I mean, it was just like it blew my mind when they didn't ask me for a contract, the temple. When they didn't ask me to pay for my food or my clothing. You know, well, what am I getting into here? That was one voice in me saying, the other voice saying, baby, are you paranoid? And watching those layers of paranoia like an onion just being taken away one by one as they were making me naked so that my heart could be that open, so that I could really be there with another consciousness, because I started to live in the place where there was nothing you could do to me. And when there's nothing you can do to me, I can be totally here for you. Because I'm not vulnerable. I'm not going to be hurt. There's no risk. There's no risk at all. And when you once know where that place is with another human being, you realize you can't afford not to have it, because you're just jipping yourself so badly. I can tell when somebody comes to see me, I look into their eyes, you see. Now, in the old days, when I'd look into somebody's eyes, it was a power play. You know? Want to control them or show them how deep I was, or look to see what they would, you know, I was doing something. I was doing something. Now I look at somebody's eyes and I'm doing mantra. I'm just empty. But I'm really here. And I can feel their eyes, and sometimes you look into somebody's eyes and it's like a deep bottomless well, and they're just there at every level. Every level you touch upon, they're there. They're just so, it's just pure consciousness that you meet. And others, you go just so far and you feel a level drop, because it's too risky to get in that close. I mean, I just met you. How can I be in love with you? And I only look that way at people I'm in, you know, that kind of thing. And to realize that that place that you are, which is pure consciousness, which is, I'll play a little game with you and give you the clues. It's light, it's energy, it's also love. It's the same exact place. It's Purusha. It's pure energy. It's the same place in you as it is in me. And when we look that way, we are in that place together. And then we are both witnessing all the rest of our acts, which is all out there from this other place. That's only if you can be truthful. If you figure you got to hide from me, you're still attached to your self-image, which has some secrets going. You've got some closed doors in your head. And all I'm saying is we cannot afford the closed doors anymore. I can't anyway. Everything in my life's an open book. You can ask me anything. I'll tell you all my perverse sexual experiences, if there's a Freudian here that wants to play. Because it doesn't mean a damn thing to me anymore. It's, you know, that's Richard Alpert, man. Poor hung-up cat. Poor hung-up cat. What a hard life he was leading. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being attached to an old model and have it hold me down. It's not worth it, even though there's all this social impropriety in being identified with it. Tough. Now, to shift gears for a second, every morning I got up at around 4:30 or 5, would go to the river to bathe, meaning pouring cold water in a lota over oneself in the dark. This is up in the Himalayas, so the temperature is sometimes 30, or, you know, it's not really, it's not Tibet, but it's chilly. You're barefoot, right, in the snow and stuff. It's interesting. You develop a thing called dumo, which is body heat, which is a way of working with the inner thing so you create the heat. And for example, one of the Tibetan initiations about dumo in the Tibetan sects is when a guy is really ready for the initiation, they take the group out to a riverbank in the sub-zero wind, and they sit naked by the river, and they dip sheets into the river and put them, they cut a hole in the ice, dip sheets in them, and put the sheets on the backs of these guys, and how many they can dry with their own body during the night is the measure of how high they are when they pass that initiation. 2 glasses of milk a day, internal heat. Where's it all leading? What have we Westerners been doing all this time? What do we think this body's all about? I met a yogi who had been buried alive for 3 years. It's like a siddhi, it's a power, it's a little feat. It's like being a high wire walker. I mean, it doesn't take you to enlightenment. He wakes up at the end of 3 years, he's just where he was when he went to sleep. However, it's impressive. And his arm was all eaten away because they hadn't packed him right, and the ants had eaten away one arm. And I talked to him about, I talked with the people that were there about how he did it. And I was told that the only amount of oxygen you need really is for your brain cells and your heart muscle. And that your cells store plenty of oxygen for that purpose. And that's why when you do go into samadhi, you do stop breathing. And when I first started to do pranayama and went through that little place, which I'll tell you about in a minute, it scared me because in my model, you don't stop breathing. That's it for your body. All right, after the bath, back into the, by the little coal stove, coal brazier. Then breathing exercises, pranayama, and asanas, meaning hatha yoga. Then chai, tea, by around 7:30. Then I usually would read something from the Gita or from the Tao or from some holy book. I was only allowed to read the books of realized beings. And that's a very subtle and interesting point. See, when you read a book written by a guy who's writing about realization, what you're really getting from him is all the reasons why he isn't a realized being. See? I mean, some of the great Westerners that are writing beautiful, insightful books about Eastern method, all they're really doing at the vibrational level is they're taking people on their own trip as to why they're not the realized being themselves. And therefore, rather than being typhoid Tessie, that kind of carrier, and getting involved in that, the rule of the game is you read only books written by people who made it. You can read the writings of Ramakrishna, you can read the writings of Ramana Maharshi, you can read the writings of Gautama Buddha, you can read the writings of Christ, and read the writings of Krishna and Ram and so on. All the rishis in India. But you don't read all the ones that we would look to as really good books in the field. Good books in the field. That's study, which is part of niyama, which is part of the second arm. So I'd read a little bit of something maybe from the book of Tao, and then I would reflect on it for a while, and then go into a formal meditation for about an hour, which I'll explain later. Then around 11, I'd write a little bit for an hour. I was sort of writing notes and ideas and working on a little book, I guess. Then around 12, my meal was placed outside the door. Sometimes at around 11, instead of writing, the teacher would come and he'd teach me for an hour or so. We'd sit with chalkboards talking to one another and he'd be teaching me. He'd like say, if you wear leather on your feet, the whole world is covered with leather. So he'd write that first. So I'd think about that, and makes pretty good sense. Everywhere you walk is leather. You're wearing leather on your feet. You think it's you, but it's just the shoes, it's your foot. Then he'd say, if you think of God, everywhere there's God. Same way. In other words, then he would say, desire is the trap. Desirelessness is moksha, meaning liberation. Desire is the creator. Desire is the destroyer. Desire is the universe. And what he was saying to me is, your desires create your universe. You desire sexual gratification, you live in a world full of sex. You desire peace militantly, you live in a militant world. When you are a peaceful being, you live in a peaceful universe. Because the vibrations that go out from you are peaceful, and the people that are involved in them experience greater feelings of wanting to be peaceful. It's as simple as that's the way it works.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate all the support for the foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to ramdas.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. Hi, I'm Raghu Marcus. So now I'm finally here, in an ashram in the foothills of the Himalayas. It looks like something out of Lost Horizon, that famous movie from the 30s. And I thought, well, I'll be here a couple of days with the guru, and then I'd be banished back to the West. But not at all. Maharaji asked me if I was going to join Ram Dass and a few others further up into the mountains to do Buddhist meditations. Actually, Ram Dass had yet to arrive back in the mountains, but he had arranged for a Buddhist meditation teacher to come be with a group of us for a couple of months. Of course, I said yes, not believing that I got to stay. Now I'm thinking that I have a guru now, and I should ask for a mantra or something. And I said, Maharaji, how should I meditate? And Maharaji said, do as Jesus did and see God in everyone. Take pity on all and love all as God. When Jesus was crucified, he only felt love. Well, that was way, way beyond what I was expecting. I mean, I was thinking I'd get like a TM mantra or something. So suddenly this whole experience was escalating way beyond my normal concept of reality. Well, Ram Dass came the next day, and I told him what Maharaji had said when I asked how to meditate. But I thought maybe he could ask how Christ actually meditated, since he had kind of a more familiar relationship with Maharaji. So the next morning, off we go to the temple, and Ram Dass asks Maharaji, how did Christ meditate? Well, the next moments were defined by a state that I had never before experienced. Maharaji sat there, closed his eyes, and then suddenly tears rolled down his cheeks. And all of us that were around him at that time, was about 4 or 5 people, Ram Dass, Krishnadas, myself, Ramesh. We were like kids when your parents cry and you don't know why. You're so too young. And then Maharaji said, he never died. He never died. He kept repeating it over and over. He never died. He was lost in love. He was one with all beings. He had great love for all in the world. He lives in the hearts of all beings. Now you have to understand that I was brought up Jewish and never even read the New Testament, and now I'm in India with a supposedly Hindu guru, and he's transmitting the essence of Christ consciousness. Amazing, and really beyond my poor, feeble, rational mind. Well, nonetheless, it was the beginning of my opening to another world.
It's the same thing that Buddha had said, you see, in his Four Noble Truths. He went and he sat under the Bodhi tree, and he came back and he said, well, here's the way it is, everybody. I can put it down in 4 statements. So simple. All life is suffering. Birth is suffering. Death is suffering. Growing old is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering, getting what you don't want is suffering, even getting what you want is suffering because you're going to lose it. The greatest pleasure, your body at the height of its thing is going to grow old. Your physical beauty is going to pass. Your intellect's going to fail. All suffering, everywhere you look is suffering. I said all life is suffering. Number two is the cause of suffering is craving. If you want something and you can't have it, then you suffer. Third noble truth, and these are pretty noble. Third noble truth is give up craving and suffering. It's like an elementary school book. Desire creates the universe, my teacher says. Buddha says give up craving and suffering. You don't desire a universe, the external universe doesn't exist. And the fourth noble truth is the eightfold path of how to get beyond attachment or desire. And the eightfold path is very similar to Raja Yoga. Then my one meal a day was brought to me at around noon. Now this meal consisted primarily of grains. It was called kejri, which is a combination of rice and dal, which is like a lentil. And now and then there was sabji or a vegetable, and a chapati, which is made of whole wheat flour and water. So that was it. That was my food for the day. Right. Now, the way you work in doing sadhana is that every act you perform becomes a method of taking you to this other state of consciousness. You're trying to change your vantage point, your perceptual vantage point, and everything you do has got to be a device to help you get to that place. From a Western point of view, you're doing a complete cognitive reorganization. You're changing your reference point. You're changing the core concept around which the whole constellation of thought is built. And therefore, you have to take every act and redefine it and develop new habits of thought for thinking about it. So, I'll give you an example. You take a piece of food like this. You're offered food. Now, in the old days, you'd sit down, and sometimes when you got into these particularly phony families, they'd say grace. And it was like, all right, come on already. And at great functions, they'd say long graces, Rabbis would get up and go on for long periods of time and so on, and they'd bless Lyndon Johnson in the Vietnam War, and they do the whole trip, right? Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahmagni, Brahmanahota, Brahmaitan, Gantabhyam, Brahma Karma Samadhina, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat, Param Brahma Tasmai, Shri Guru Venamaha, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Translation? First thing is, this ritual that I'm going through now is Brahma. In other words, now I got to stop for a moment, for those of you that are new in this game, to explain the meaning of Brahma. Here is the gross universe. Your bodies, this table, this microphone, it's all gross, coming through your senses, right? Gross energy. Slowed down, way slowed down. Mass energy, you all understand that, so we can go through that quickly. Then you get to finer energies like thought. That's just energy slowed down less. It's faster, finer, faster and finer. Light is such an energy. Keep going finer and finer and finer until you get to the unit of energy which is so fine, or the unit of stuff, you can call it, that is so fine that it's interchangeable in everything in the universe. It's what the air is made up of, it's what light's made up of, it's what thought's made up of, it's what gross things are made up of, right? that all is still form. It's still in the form of energy. It's just very fine energy. It's called prakriti in the particular system, the Hindu system, this particular Patanjali system. Prakriti is the finest level of form, the converse side of which is the formless. That is the akash, or that place where it all is behind form. Now, if you just think of this as a set of levels, hypothetically for the moment, if you haven't experienced these, and if you've watched it all happen, it's one thing, but if not, theoretically you go through these levels. So you go gross, finer, 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 to the finest type of stuff, and then all of that is contained within and is the opposite side of and is in continuous cycle of emerging and disappearing with that which is formless, which is behind it. That which is formless, which is behind it, which contains all, is what's called Brahma. It's called the Akash, it's called Purusha, it's got lots and lots of names to it. And that place which is behind is stable, it's always the same, it's never changing, and all the stuff when it comes down into form, when the Prakriti starts to work and creates manifestations, that's all sort of like illusion. It's just happening and all going back into this place, which always is, and all of this is it in a solid form. Solid nothingness, or fullness, however you want to play it. Doesn't mean empty, as you can understand, because it's everything. It's everything and nothing. It's all and everything. It's the clear white light. It's the, right? Except it's beyond that. It's beyond any polarities, any labels, it's not white because it's not dark, it's not anything. It's everything. All right, that's Brahma, right? So everything you see, now you go back to the apple, and what have we got is the statement, the ritual I am going through is part of Brahma. You see, my thought about doing this thing is part of Brahma. The offering, meaning the apple, is Brahma. He who is making the offering, meaning me, I'm part of Brahma. The fire to which the fire that's consuming the offering, meaning my hunger, that's also Brahma. And he to whom I'm making the offering, that's also Brahma. I mean, in other words, if I can conceive of any finite form, which I'll call God, see, keep in mind that's just another manifestation of Brahma, right? One level down, it's in form. It's finite. Then the last line of that is, he who keeps in mind that all is Brahma goes to Brahma, becomes enlightened, in other words. And then the next part of it is, you offer it, you reverence it, and you offer it to Brahma, which is not that Brahma, it's Brahma then manifested initially in the Hindu pantheon in 3 manifestations. There were 3 initial manifestations. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma is the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. Right? And so you offer it to each of these 3 initial manifestations called the Godheads, the Godhead. And then that's Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, that's Shiva. Guru Sakshat is the Shiva, the Shakti, Shiva Shakti, the female energy component. You offer it to the female energy component. Param Brahma is the Super Brahma. That's that one back there we were talking about that you remembered you're part of. And finally, you reverence the lotus feet of your Guru. And then you ask for peace. Now, you see how eating, now let's see what happens after you've done all that, and then you start to eat. Because this is the game I got caught in. You see, I didn't mind giving up sex, because after all, you're sitting in India anyway, where you don't hardly ever see the women, because they're all hiding behind doors anyway. And it was all right, it was an interesting thing to be doing while I was in India, giving up sex. And I didn't mind being cold, and I didn't mind all the other things, but I'm a very oral guy. See, who I was would say I am a very oral guy. coming out of a good Jewish family where food and love and all that were all chicken soup, right? And therefore, you know, I didn't mind all the rest of the austerities, but when that food came, it could have been swill from the bucket. And it was the food that I was given, and it was steak from Original Joe's, and it was lobster Savannah from Lockover's, and it was, you know, it was every possible delicacy. I mean, it was just rice and dal, but as far as I was concerned, I ate it with the same, getting completely lost in the joy of eating, right? You know, the delicacy of the flavor and the joy of swallowing, oh, the whole thing, right? And I'd savor and, you know, and overload and just eat and eat everything that was available, you know. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm not going to give this up. Nobody's pushing you, you know. Who you fighting against? So finally, I thought, see, then here's what happened. Every Tuesday you don't eat. See, it's Mangalam Day. You fast for a day. So, okay, I can fast for a day. I used to do it on Yom Kippur all the time. But the difference was in Yom Kippur, around the middle of the afternoon, you start to have fantasies about all the food you're going to eat when the fast is passed, you see. And now, these people don't fast like, you know, it doesn't matter whether they eat or don't eat, right? You're in a different environment. You're not sitting in the temple with everybody saying, are you going home to cook the... Okay. Then, one day, I fasted on Mangalam Day, and the next day, the guy that usually cooks, the sadhu that usually cooks the food, had a bad tooth, and he went somewhere, or something happened, I don't know, and there was no food. So I was being very game about the whole thing, and I just, well, listen, I'm a sadhu, what's, you know, food, I'll just ignore it. So I didn't eat that day. Next day, the teacher came, and I said, well, I didn't eat for 2 days. It's like, you know, what happens is, see, the very subtle way your ego works is you no sooner finish some little accomplishment on your sadhana, on your spiritual path, and the ego walks behind you and pats you in the back. It's pretty good. That's the way it sort of sneaks back in to take over again. So I said to the guru, the teacher, well, I didn't eat yesterday either. 2 days I didn't eat. He says, well, if it doesn't disturb you, he said, it is good on the full moon every 3 months to go for 9 days. Well, now. Right. That's not 9 days without liquid. You do take liquid, right? Just don't take any solid. He says it's good for your intestine. Well, all right, by gosh, I'll do it, right? Well, you get a little weak around the 4th day, and my fantasies are, you know, I lie on my mat. It's not in bed, you're on a mat, see? And I lie on my mat, and I would think about Thanksgiving. And I'd think about the squash with the marshmallows on it. And all the things I'd never have again, see? And oh, I was so full of self-pity. Oh, and I'd recite the whole thing, and I'd be out raking leaves in my head, and I'd smell the turkey cooking, and then I'd go in and I'd see the pumpkin pies, and oh boy, I just created the whole thing, and I spent 9 days just locked in oral fantasies of the most extraordinary nature, right? Which, since I hadn't given up a desire or attachment, the act of fasting had no spiritual value particularly at all, except it showed me where I wasn't. Well, by the second round, I had changed. The second 3-month time, when that came up. So this time, it was very interesting. My fantasies now weren't about turkey or lobster or any of the things I'd never have again. Now they were about spinach and big piles of brown rice. You know, all the things I could eat again. I just had limited my fantasy life now to what was going to be available to me. But I was still having these fantasies, and I was still very locked in food, and it lasted much through the winter. And then I remember what happened. I tried every device. I tried the Southern Buddhist meditation, which is like a cemetery meditation, where you look at your bags of intestines, and you look at the food as, you know, worm-ridden Certainly didn't make it a groove, but I still ate with great relish, you know. It's all right, worms, you know, some people eat ants. And I couldn't quite break out. And it was no matter what I did, when the food came, like it was just like I was a ravenous animal. It had nothing to do with being a holy man. And I tried very hard all the methods I knew of not being attached to the food, but I couldn't work it. And then I started to do a meditation, which is created by Ramana Maharshi, called Vichara Atma. And this meditation says, it says, who am I? I am not my body. And then you feel your body and you experience the I inside your head as separate from the body. Then you say, I am not my senses. And you watch each of the senses receiving its information, and you see the I as separate from that sense. Now that process, for example, when you're sitting in a room and there's a clock ticking and you pick up a book to read, you don't hear the clock tick when you're caught in the book. And then the minute you finish with the book, you hear the clock tick again. Well, you've all had that experience. Well, when the clock is ticking continuously, it continues to tick, your ear continues to optic nerve, your auditory nerve continues to receive, but your attention is not there. That's where that break came, and it came involuntarily. Well, you learn to do it voluntarily, to turn off each of these senses, to see it happening. You see your ear hearing, you see your eye seeing, but you see it from the I place, which is not the air, and it's not the eye, and it's not the skin, and so on. Then you say, I am not the 5 organs of action, and it's the arms and the legs and the tongue and the anus and the genitals. And you go through each of these and experience it separate from the I. Then I am not the 5 internal organs, and you go through breathing and respiration and excretion and perspiration and digestion. Same way. Then you get to the clincher, which is the last line, which says, I am not this thought. You see? Now you've gotten to the point where there's just the I thought left in the middle of your head. I am not this, I am not that, I am not that. And then you say, I am not this thought. Now the thought, I am not this thought, is the thought you are not. Dig that? So, it's just like your thoughts become like on the Times building in New York, where the news is going by on a ticker. That's where your thoughts are. They're out there. And where you are, you can't label, because any label is a thought. All right, you're appreciative of that problem. You see, it's a vehicle for pushing you beyond your mind. It's beautiful. It takes you to the true self, he says, all right? Now, you go into that place, I am not this thought, and then you go back into this first state of bliss. You go into a great calm bliss place. And the minute you slip out, you know, you have another thought, well, who's thinking that? Well, who am I? Well, I am not the, and you go right back in again, see? Well, I worked with it for quite a while until finally I was in this blissful state. And then one day it happened. I was sitting in this state, just sitting there, and the food came along, and I said, oh man, it's the food. I mean, am I going to stop this for that? And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? I noticed this. I mean, this really blew my mind to have this happen. It was blowing, literally. That was what happened, of course. And I thought, well, gee, maybe I can eat without leaving this state. So I started to eat just as if, it was just happening, but I wasn't in it. I was watching myself eat. In the Southern Buddhist method, it's called eating, eating. You watch eating, eating, chewing, chewing, swallowing, swallowing. You know, digesting, digesting. Thinking about food, thinking about food. But you who is doing all that is behind all that, the witness. And I watched the whole thing, and all the fun was gone out of eating. 1 second, I'll stop.
Those who want to take 5:30
Gotcha.
long enough, and they're reminded it's a bus at 7:30. So come out for the 5:30 or wait for the 7:30.
Those that you have to leave, I won't say anything interesting after this. So. Although I'll talk all night. Now, what had happened clearly was that I had gone to a place where that attachment, even that attachment, was starting to fall away. And that was the subjective experience that went along with it. That was the first time that had happened for me ever in my life that I could remember about food. It was like you just eaten a huge meal, that indifference you have to food. Now you see, the game that I was learning, which is very well reflected in the Satipatthana Vipassana, the Southern Buddhist meditation, is the problem of labeling everywhere your attachment goes, everywhere your mind goes. And by the process of labeling, you extricate yourself from the desire or from the feeling. I'll go through that a little later when I get to meditation. So that was eating. And then after lunch, I'd lay around. Sometimes I'd lie in the sun and make believe I was on the Riviera. And beautiful women were feeding me grapes and things. And sometimes I just sat in the sun and prayed to the sun. And I learned mantras, beautiful mantras, like Aditya Hridayam Punyam Sav Shatru Bina Shanam. All evil vanishes from life for he who keeps the sun in his heart. And every time I see the sun in the day, when I first come out, the sun is there, the first thing I do, Aditya Hridayam Punyam Sav Shatru Bina Shanam. And I feel that, because it's the same thing. Remember, I said light, energy, consciousness, love. The sun is consciousness. It's one level down into grossness because it's in the physical universe. Now, I will digress here, since I said in the physical universe, to make a very critical point that is going to shake many of you. And I'll say it very baldly. The journey to enlightenment is basically a struggle against nature. And it is only when you are enlightened that you can be once again in form, because at the same moment you are in formlessness, and nature is form. Now, what I mean by nature is the following. It's everything from Purusha, below Purusha, all forms of energy, no matter how fine they are. Your mind is part of energy, your body's part of nature, your body's part of nature. Electricity's part of nature, light's part of nature. The trees are part of nature. All your senses are part of nature. The image is given by Ramakrishna. The story comes from the Ramayana by Tulsidas. When Rama, this very pure reincarnation of God, was sent out into the woods, he went off with his wife Sita, who was a very pure woman, and Lakshman, his brother, who reverenced his brother Ram very much, because Ram was God in this incarnation. And what happened was that Lakshman would walk third in line, and therefore, during the jungle paths, he would never see Ram. And every now and then, Sita would stand aside on the path so Lakshman could see Ram. And that is the way in which the Hindus conceive of nature as being the mother nature, or Maya, or illusion, or that which is form, which hides you from experiencing that other place to the extent that you're attached to it. And it is within that context, then, that you can understand the meaning of what sexual continence is about, you see, because sexual continence would seem to go against our responsibilities as evolutionary beings within the species and for reproduction of the species. Now that's very heady stuff to think about, because when you see the cycle, the way it works, there is what we have called Darwinian evolution, or the evolution of the species, which is all in nature, bringing man up to the point where he has an intellect, a rational mind, which is then capable of knowing itself, which is the first vehicle that is suitable for the breakthrough to see the fact that all of this is illusion. Pure consciousness has existed in everything always, in always the same way. So it is only that in the evolutionary cycle, man gets to the point where you have a human birth, where you can be conscious of the ignorance you have lived with. But you've always been fully conscious. It's always been there in you, in every organism, in everything. Same consciousness. This is all consciousness. This is all consciousness. Now, if you want to see the way, if you want to feel your way through how it works, see, there's a hard time we in the West have with a word like soul. But the way in which the Hindus conceive of it is that at the moment of conception, when the sperm and the egg, sperm fertilizes the ovum, at that moment, you enter. You enter in your full consciousness into that natural phenomenon, into that part of nature. Now, the reason what is you that enters? You can think of you that enters as composed of two components. One is pure Atman, it's called, which is that which is God in all of us, which is that element of consciousness which is pure and untouched. It's the Purusha. It's that little bit of Purusha that's in you, in this particular form, although all your cells are that too at another level. I hope I'm not confusing you. I'm trying to get this across. Now, what else is there that is you at that point? What else there is that is you is what would be called your sanskaras. That is your potentials, or your uniquenesses that you're bringing from previous runs on the cycle, previous runs into nature. You're going in and out of nature. And you pick up so much disequilibrium. It's really what sanskaras boil down to is the relationship of the three gunas, of rajas, tamas, and sattvic, of purity, energy, and lethargy, or darkness, movement, and lightness. When these are in pure balance, you are in the Purusha. You're pure consciousness. You're an enlightened being. But the minute there's a disbalance, which is like, it's like maybe a free-moving electron goes through a field and creates a whole scene around it of disequilibrium. That's the level at which you can think of the prime cause, if you want to play with prime cause, although it's a reasonably trivial question to play with, because we can't solve it. But if you think about this disequilibrium, you come into that fertilized ovum as merely Atman encased in that disequilibrium proportion, or that propensity. But that propensity is what determined what ovum you come into, which determines your whole life experience. That is your karma that you're going to live out in this lifetime. Now, you've got to understand that the place you came from, the Atman, that place behind it all, is outside of time. And this is finally the area where Western physics is finally getting close to the place, because they are finally dealing with the matter of the relative nature of time. And that time is merely is our construct rather than the way in which it all is. Now, you come from this timeless place, and what determines You see, and this, by the way, is where astrology comes into it, you see, because the particular configuration of planets at that point of the fertilization is through probably a magnetic field of some sort at that level of energy, a very pure form of energy, is a determinant of the chemical makeup of that organism, of the, you could call it the endocrine system. That's a reasonable way in which they're linked. That various planetary configurations is just like, I mean, the simplest way of saying it is, our body is 90-some-odd% water, and the moon makes the tides go up and down, and the moon affects our bodies also, because they're mostly water. Well, in the same way, the different chemical compositions of the different planets have magnetic pulls on the different chemical compositions in our body, and the different organs or endocrine systems have different chemical makeups, and they are differentially affected by these planetary configurations. It seems very big and very little to be related, but there is a relationship.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and raamdaas.org. We appreciate all the support for the foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to raamdaas.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and raamdaas.org. Hi, I'm Raghu Marcus. So, from Maharaji's temple and that incredible atmosphere, we all boarded a bus to a remote Himalayan town called Kosani, not more than 100 miles, as the crow flies, to the 29,000-foot Himalayan peaks. It was an absolutely amazing place, where very few Westerners had been. And there I was, with Ram Dass and 4 other fellow travelers, all of us, except for Ram Dass, under the age of 25. That was a mighty leap for me from the streets of Montreal to this rarefied perch in the Himalayas. And so we arranged for a cottage to stay in on top of the hill that looked onto these mountains, and we set up house. I think there was about 5 of us, dragging buckets of water from the well way down the hill and food from the town below, and meditating many hours a day, which was the purpose of this retreat. And that was a new thing for me. I mean, I had done TM meditation and so on, but we were practicing a Buddhist meditation called Vipassana, basically insight meditation, using the breath to get one pointed. In those surroundings, actually those surroundings included meditating in a cowshed, which had been used, we were told, by Haryakan Baba, this incredible Siddha who lived in that area and died in the 20s. So it was in this sacred space that I started to have real meditative experiences for the first time. And all the while, in the evenings, Ram Dass would sit with us and relate stories of his journey through psychedelics and consciousness. It was such a rich experience and very otherworldly. I remember in the mornings we'd get up at 6 to meditate, and Ram Dass would come along and gently wake every one of us up and say, "Good morning, Brother Mitchell," which was my name at the time. Now, at the same time, way back up the road in Kenchi, Maharaji started sending Westerners to this little town, saying to them, "Why don't you go meditate with Ram Dass?" Well, that was the last thing in the world that Ram Dass wanted, a growing group of needy, groping Westerners. So, as this drama unfolded, we realized we needed a bigger space, which led us to take over the Gandhi Ashram facility across town on the other hill. It was there that we sort of had an official ashram with about 15 or 20 people in this sacred space where Gandhi wrote one of his books. It was quite a scene. I remember one of the things that went on was that each of us sat with Ram Dass. He was the teacher, obviously. And he would say, just looking directly into your eyes, if there's anything you're afraid to say that you can't tell anybody, say it now. And so people would blurb out all of their thoughts that they were afraid of. Now, we were in this ashram, and the walls were like paper thin. So everybody on either side, and even below, could hear everything that was going on in this little interview that Ram Dass did with people. So we all got to know each other's crazy thoughts. And they were all pretty much the same, usually based around some sexual hang-up. So that was a fun thing. And then after a while, you got to see that these thoughts had no substance. It was a great exercise. So there we were, perched on top of the world. I mean, we could walk out of our room and sit on a stone parapet that actually looked right out into the, those 29,000 foot peaks. I mean, it was just, the mist would break and you'd see the peaks. It was just incredible, incredible. It was a dream come true for me to be in a place like this and to have Maharaji, his blessings on all of us sitting in this place and doing this work together with Ram Dass. It was a dream I never even knew I had.
It's interesting that in India, all marriages are planned by the astrologer in the villages, because they know that the information you're going to get through your senses has nothing to do with your long-range compatibility. And therefore, they'll work it out according to these other kinds of things. All right, now you're born then into this, you get born, you go through the fetal stage and you get born, and you're a neonate, a 7-pound neonate. Now, 7-pound neonate, if you knew at that point, if you were fully conscious, you would know that you were still fully conscious and you were just in a 7-pound neonate. However, the 7-pound neonate gets hungry and it cries. There's hunger and crying and so on, and everybody around you treats you as if you're that neonate. It's just as if you came off the assembly line at Detroit and you drove the car off the line, and then everybody treated you as if you were the car. Your whole life thinking you were Chevrolet. Therefore, because you were Chevrolet, you had to drive down roads a certain way, and you had to park in garages a certain way, and you developed a whole concept of the universe based on you being a Chevrolet. While in fact, it was merely the illusion. You got caught in the desires, in the entrapment of the that part of nature which you were in. You've got your feet on the mic. It now then may take you all your lifetime or many lifetimes to wake up to the realization that this particular bizarre circumstance had happened. That you got caught in this thing, in this wrong model of who you were. And it's called the veil, or the dust in the eyes, or the veil of ignorance, or your sanskaras, or whatever. There are thousands of words that describe the thing that made us think for a mistake that I was that body, so that when I lost the body in that first drug session, I got frightened. I mean, if I get out of my Chevrolet, I'm not going to get frightened. Even if the Chevrolet goes over a cliff, if I'm not in it, even if I think I'm my body, because I don't think I'm the Chevrolet. But I didn't realize I was in a rent-a-body. You know, not only a rent-a-body, but a rent-a-mind. A rent-a-mind, everybody. That my rational thought process was in nature as well. That was part and parcel of the whole trip I bought when I got born into this thing. See? But it's certainly been seductive, and I certainly thought I was thinking, and that my thoughts were me. I'm a thinking being. Right? Now, it is for these reasons that I say that the problem is getting free of nature. So that when you, like I'm up in New Hampshire in a little cabin, see, up in the woods, up in Franklin, in my father's farm, and all around are beautiful trees, and they got red leaves and golden leaves and yellow leaves. And always in the past, I came up to New Hampshire in the autumn to dig the leaves. So I'm sitting in my cabin, and the shutters are all down, and I'm sitting there, and somebody comes in and says, "How can you be in here when all the leaves are so beautiful?" And I say, because I'm not yet free enough to be able to be with the leaves without getting caught in the beauty. Getting caught in the beauty. Now, this business of being caught is the critical matter that is the first step that people undertake in the road to becoming liberated. It is the technique which Gurdjieff has so exquisitely enunciated in his model of self-remembering. And Gurdjieff says it in one way, and Rodney Collin, the disciple of Ouspensky, says it in a slightly different way. Gurdjieff says, your problem is that you identify. You learn to identify as a child with your body, then you identify with your mother's concept of who you are, so you develop social roles, and you identify with the concepts of the universe all around you, so you become a thinking, rational being in a rational system. And then pretty soon when you're angry, you say, I'm angry, and you identify with the anger, and you are anger. And you identify with being in love, and you identify with desires, and you identify with your lusts, and you identify with everything. Just go from one thing. You identify with other people's opinions of you, what Dave Reisman calls the other-directed man. Rodney Collin calls it fascination. He says we're like bees. We just are so fascinated by everything. We're just like going from flower to flower. Like if you're listening to me and just hearing my words and aren't conscious at this moment that you're listening to me and hearing my words, you're fascinated, you're trapped. That's where you're at. That's what it comes down to. Because all the time I'm talking to you, I'm going, that mantra is going on and on inside of me. And from that place, which is completely outside of this game of lecture and our visiting together, I'm watching this whole drama unfold. Just like I were one of the actors on the stage. No fascination at all. I'm in the same place as if I'm saying, Om Mani Padme Hum, in my cabin in New Hampshire or in the ashram in India. Same place. There's no place to go. There's no place you ever go. You're always in the same place. When you begin to realize there's nowhere to go, it's, it's quite shaky. Shaking at first. Driving and driving, and there's nowhere to go. You're not getting anywhere. Because you're there. You're here. Now, the fascination or identification, if you understand that concept, that is the attachment to your senses, and that is the game, is to get free of that. And the process of self-remembering is the process of developing the witness, or in Ramana Maharshi's terms, the I thought. That is that place from which you observe all of your desires, all of your attachments, all of your feelings. Just like Bhagwan Das said to me, the feeling is a wave that's disappearing off into the distance. Well, in the same way, when first what happens is, as those of you that have studied the Gurdjieff system know, you say, all right, I'm going to self-remember. There I am self-remembering. And then something comes along and you start to get angry, and you so forget your self-remembering because you're so busy, why that son of a, I'm going to, And about 2 days later you wake up and say, holy mackerel, wasn't I self-remembering at that point? And you completely forgot you're even trying to do it, see? So you say, okay, well, I'll start again. So you start again, and this time maybe you only fall asleep for a day and a half. And if you keep at it, if you really work at it as hard as you work to learn how to drive a car, for example, pretty soon you get down so that you get to the point where you keep falling asleep just as often, but you wake up very quickly. And then you get to the point where, like, what happens to me now is I start to get angry, and the starting to get angry is the cue, the stimulus, that pushes me back into the self-remembering. And I say, there I go, starting to get angry. The minute I say, there I go, starting to get angry, I have now identified myself with the witness. And I am no longer the angry. I am now the person who is observing the angry. And by doing that, I have just extricated myself from going through the attachment to that emotion through that whole cycle. Do you see how that works? Am I getting through to you? Okay. Therefore, that method of developing the witness is a tremendously powerful first step of a two-step operation on this journey, because you begin, what you do is you just observe that which is in nature doing its thing. You observe the laws of nature as you are they. As you are they, yeah. Just like you watch a tree drop its seeds and germinate and grow, and watch big oaks out of acorns grow and all that, you watch the laws of your own personality. You watch the laws of your own desires. You just watch them. The witness doesn't do anything. This is very, very critical. See, a kid will come up to me and he'll say, well, I'll tell you, I use the witness. He said, I'm Catholic and I have, sometimes I masturbate and then I say, oh, damn it, you did it again. Now that's the witness. I said, no, man. The witness says, there I am masturbating, and then the witness says, there I am damning myself for masturbating. All the witness is a witness. The witness is the non-game place. The witness is not active. The witness doesn't do anything. The witness isn't witnessing. The witness is just the I. E-Y-E or I, the spiritual I. It's merely there. It's always there. It's always there. And it does nothing. It's got no vested interest, no morality, no laws, no game going. It doesn't care what you do. All it does is see it all. Right? Now, how do you develop the witness? Well, there are devices that are designed to help you develop the witness. Heuristic devices. Rodney Collins says the problem is that you get so fascinated with things like anger or the candle flame or whatever it is that you become the thing itself. And therefore there are thousands of me's, but there's always like you and the thing. That's the relationship. He says what to do is to introduce a third thing into the system. It's just like, let's say you're doing something that you've always done. Say you do asanas, and you're doing your asanas, and you've always done them alone in your room, and then suddenly somebody's standing there just watching you do them. Well, now, what happens, whether you like to think of it at all, is that which is your ego gets called into play, and you are observing how he's seeing your asanas. Okay? Now imagine that third person, so that there's you and like the book you're reading, and then there's somebody else there, is somebody who's like my guru. He's a perfect mirror. He's got no game going at all. No game going at all. He doesn't care whether I read the book or don't read the book. He's just saying, reading the book. Reading the book. Right? That kind of a consciousness. So Rodney Collins says it doesn't matter who you put in there as the third person. You can call it the witness. You can call it Buddha consciousness, and you can read about Buddha and think about Buddha and keep Buddha with you all the time, so that every time you're anywhere, Buddha's there too. That's the third person. You can read about Christ and keep Christ there. You can read about the Guru, keep the Guru there. You can think about the sun. Aditya hridayam punyam sav shatru vinashanam. All evil vanishes from life for he who keeps the sun in his heart. There's the third thing, the sun in your heart. How can I go and do you in when the sun is in my heart? See, as long as I can keep conscious of that third thing, I'm protected from getting trapped in my own fascinations or in my own identification. Do you see how that works? Now, that's what a device like this is about. You see, that's what the device like a mala and doing japam is about. I mean, people look at it and they think of a priest doing the rosary, and they think of sort of like a mechanical religiosity of some sort. But, oh, it's much more sophisticated than that. It works, that works, but it's much more sophisticated than that. Because what this is constantly doing is taking you to that place where that third person is. So everything else is in relation to that other vantage point. Let us take the traditional one that all the Tibetans use. Om Mani Padme Hum. I'm giving you the Tibetan enunciation. Om Mani Padme Hum. Hum. Way it works, Om, the sound of the universe. You know, all the sounds of the universe. Om starts in the back of your mouth and comes up to your tongue. Om, Om, Om. Mani is like a jewel, or like pure, or the Atman, or pure consciousness. That's that thing. Om is the jewel. Padme is the lotus. Om Mani Padme. Om is the jewel in the center of the lotus. Or you can think of the lotus as the unfolding senses, or inside your senses. Om Mani Padme Hum becomes manifest in your heart. That is, that part of Om which is manifest in you is in your heart. Hung, the heart cave, hung. And when you say hung right, with your nose closed, it reverberates in your chest until pretty soon it reminds you, it keeps that heart cave going all the time. So literally, I live in a cave. I can be driving in my car, or I can be sitting in the Hilton, or I can be anywhere, but I'm always in the same place. I'm in this very groovy cave, you see. And in this cave are the grooviest people. See? Because they're all the same person. They have different forms. There's Buddha over there in the corner, and there's Hanuman the monkey, and there's Ramakrishna over there, you know, going into ecstasy. And all these groovy people hanging around, they're my spiritual community. They're the people I hang out with. They're the people that live in my cave. Right? And I'm constantly dipping into my cave. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme. So I'm talking along with you, and every time I move one of these beads, which since I'm doing a Tibetan mantra, I do with my left hand. This is a little, one of those intellectual cuties. While with the right hand you do Hindu mantras, and you don't use your first finger because that's the pointing finger, so you use your third finger moving it with your thumb. So you're doing Om Mani Padme, and this is a Buddhist mala. It's made of the Bodhi tree, and this is a Hindu mala. It's made of the Tulsi wood. These are the two different very holy woods in India. This mala was given to me by my teacher. It was given to him by the Guru 15 years ago. When he got it, these little beads were all square, flat. And 100,000 times a day for 15 years, Ram, 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 Ram. He's a high Brahmin. He's very pure. He counts. That's what keeps you locked in the golden chain when you count, you know, the steps to paradise. I'm 10 million Rams up the steps. It's the point system. And now these are all round and smooth just by the human touch. And, you know, like this is invested with so much spiritual energy that when he gives it to me, it's like giving me the, you know, you understand? All right, so every time I move one of these beads, now let's say I start to talk to you, and I'm talking about something that I don't quite understand, so I'm really listening to myself talk, and I kind of get caught in it. I mean, I get fascinated by it for a moment. And I'm just doing this mechanically, and then suddenly my thumb, I'm aware that I'm doing something, and immediately Om Mani Padme Hum goes through another time. I go back into that, and then that changes my frame of reference, and I get uncaught. In other words, this device is constantly taking me back to that place. At the same time, it's a form of worship, you see, because I am worshiping. This is bhakti yoga also, you see. This is a form of devotion, because you're devoted to that third person, that third place, because that place is God, is consciousness, is light, is everything you want to conceive of as purity, as that pure higher consciousness. Now, I have not been systematic thus in my talk, and I know you're probably tired, and I've probably talked too long. Let me just say a couple of more words about consciousness, and I will leave the rest of it undone, because I can't really do all the training and teaching you, because it would take many, many hours. To understand how the Guru told me my mother died of spleen, I mean, that's an interesting thing. It'd be fun to know how he does that, you know. Like, what's up his sleeve, or, you know, what's his game? What's his game? What's your game there? Well, my game is this. Once you've made your mind one-pointed, all right, now here's the way you work. You get your mind calmer and calmer, as the Mahamudra vow says. At first, Tilopa's thing of Mahamudra, at first, the mind is like a waterfall. Your mind's going in all directions. It's like a wild, drunken monkey, Vivekananda says. It's like a monkey that is moving to begin with, that you've fed wine to, so it's drunk in addition, and it's just been bitten by a scorpion. That was Vivekananda's way of creating what the mind is like. You know, it's just jumping from thing to thing. I got an itch. I hear your word, I'm thinking about this, gee, I wonder, gee, it's dark, you know, like the seat's hard, I gotta go to the bathroom, you know, like 10,000 things, and they just like, oh, flip, 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 flip. It's called free association. Okay, there it all is. That's the drunken monkey. So pretty soon what you do, those are called the vrittis and the chitta. I won't get you into the terminology tonight, because that's too much, it sounds like double talk, but what you do slowly is you calm down these waves until pretty soon it's just like a very fast-moving river. And the way you do that is by getting into the witness and watching it all happen. That's one way of doing it. And pretty soon, as you're watching it all happen, it starts to happen less and less, because you're not lost in it as much. And you sort of cease to let your mind, you've just watched it, and it sort of becomes embarrassed. It's very funny. It's like your ego gets embarrassed under the scrutiny of this thing. And then, finally, it gets just like an ocean. Your mind is perfectly calm. And you're just perfectly calm. And now, when you work on becoming one-pointed in your thinking, say you're doing tratak, which is a technique of working with a candle flame. This is one of the arms of yoga, which is pratyahara. You look at an external object. Now, most people, when they look at a candle flame, they sit down. The candle flame should be up here. It should be right above where your ajna is, the sixth chakra. You look at the candle flame and you try to make something happen. Well, already you've lost. The game is you put the candle there and you're here, and that's it. That's all you got to do. You just sit here and there's you and there's the candle. You don't look at the candle, you just be here and there's the candle being there. It's doing its thing, you're doing your thing. And you just sit there with the candle, and pretty soon all your thoughts are all around here. They're like little bugs flying in and around the candle flame. Just the candle, and I can look at the candle and I can see your glasses, and I can see your shirt, and I can see your dress. I can see all that. I can hear the door opening, and I can hear myself talking, and see my hands moving, and feel my muscles. And there's just me and the candle. Just my witness, and the candle is the witness, and the rest of it's just all happening around us. And as I do this, after a while, pretty soon all this quiets down, and I cease to be overwhelmed by all my senses until pretty soon there's just the candle and me. I didn't do anything. I didn't try to do anything. It just happened. And then if I keep doing that, pretty soon I am just there with the candle. Now that's one-pointedness of mind, all right? You've calmed down, you're able to think of one thing, right? Now, the next part of that, of the next leg, is called dharana, which means doing the same thing on something inside. Like you take ajna, you take this point where these three nerves meet up here. And instead of looking at the cowl, you close your eyes and you focus on that place, right behind your brow, right in there. And again, you just be there. And pretty soon, that's where you are. That's all you are, is just a point of consciousness right there. That's it. There's not a body, there's nothing. There's just a point of consciousness right there. Now, when you have succeeded in doing that, you are nearly home. Then you hold it longer and longer, and it's called dhyana, and you hold it longer and longer, and you go into samadhi. Now, as you go, there are different levels of samadhi, which is this state where you've flipped over and you just, that place, that's all. You've given up everything else but that place. You're still in form. You're still being a candle flame. At that point, you can perform a thing called samyama, because at that point, you see, you have freed your consciousness from your body. In other words, you have overridden that veil of ignorance which had convinced you all those years that you, which is your pure consciousness, and that body and mind were one and the same thing. And by going down and down to that one place and then going behind, right back in there, you get to a place where you're just pure consciousness. And then, if you are in the candle flame, that's where you are. And samyama is the quality of getting outside of the egocentric predicament. So that when you perform samyama on something, like another person's mind, you are their mind. Literally, I'm not putting you on. It's not mind reading. You are there. That's where you are, because you're not here, certainly, because you left your body. You have merged your consciousness. Here's what's happened. You have purified and purified. You've separated your consciousness from the gross energy, body, from the finer energy, thought. You get it down to this finest energy, which is what it's been all along, which is called the Atman, or Brahma, or Prakriti, rather. And then it merges, and it becomes the entire place. It's the entire universe. It merges into everything, because it's all interchangeable at that level. It's all interchangeable. You see, energy at that level is all interchangeable. And that's all you are, so you are part of it all. That's what the Hindus mean when they say, well, the place is in samadhi, you go to Sat Chit Ananda. That means absolute existence. It doesn't mean you exist, it means you are existence. Absolute knowledge. It doesn't mean you know, it means you are knowledge. Ananda, bliss, doesn't mean you feel bliss, it means you are bliss. You go to that place where you are it all. And you reside in that place where you are it all in the formless state. And then when there is the requirement for you to come down into some form or bring back something, you merely can go into that form to bring it back. In other words, in that place that he goes to, which I'm going to recite a little poem in a second about it, that place he goes to, in Sat Chit Ananda, there is no time. Past, present, and future, it's all part of the warp and woof of the nature dance. It's all nature's out there. He's part of nature. He's merged in it. It's all part of the same thing. But from this other point of view, it's all there. It's both there and he's part of it all. And therefore, since he's beyond time, he can be anything in any time. So he is actually my mother's swollen belly 9 months previously in Boston, Massachusetts, because there is the requirement of my rational mind to be overridden at that point. And that's the thing that is the vehicle he uses, which is the essence vehicle to deal with the emotional love I have for my mother and the feeling of the spiritual link I have with her, and he works with the whole thing, and that's the thing he pulls out of that Akash, brings back into form. But it's all available to him. Ramana Maharshi was 17 years old. He was sitting in his uncle's study. He was a high school student. He wasn't even a religious high school student. and the kid feels he's going to die. And instead of calling somebody, he lies down and he feels himself die and be taken to the burning gut and burned, and he goes through the whole trip. And then he says, well, just like I said, who's minding the shop? The same experience. It's the same experience. Except the difference between me and Ramana Maharshi was a little difference in sanskaras, because he never came down. See, he was a fully enlightened being at that moment. He stayed that way forever. And so what happened was, 2 weeks later, he split from home and he went off to Arunachala, the holy mountain in southern India, climbed up there and he meditated for the rest of his life. And people came by the thousands to visit Ramana Maharshi. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful saint. And wise pundits would come from around India. And they would ask him these technical questions about specific bits of knowledge from philosophy and from, very esoteric books, and he would give them answer in chapter and verse, though he had never read any of them. It's the same way in which my teacher knows 8 languages. 8 is all I've ever seen demonstrated. I assume he knows all languages. He must be all languages. Just like my guru could talk to me in English if he chose to. And he talks to me through my heart because he doesn't have to talk through gross language. And when I went to Delhi from the mountains in March, and I went by bus on 14-hour trip to Delhi, and I went to American Express and BOAC and all that, and then in the afternoon I was hungry, so I went into a vegetarian restaurant, and I had a meal, and at the end of the meal I had been like living very frugally, so I had ice cream, and they had 2 biscuits for the ice cream, and boy, I savored those biscuits. They were the first, like sweet thing I'd had like that. And then I went to the Buddhist monastery I was staying at that night, and the next day I got on the bus, drove 14 hours back to the temple. The guru had been up in the mountains. I hadn't seen him for over a month. A few days later, I hear the guru is back, and we all, you get on the bus and everybody's rushing to the guru, because that's that feeling of love. You just want to see the guy, which is more or less relevant. And I get there and I fall, danda pranam, and I'm down there, and he grabs my hair and he pulls my head back and he looks at me and he says, "How'd you like the biscuits?" Now, you dig that where his consciousness is not only with me in the biscuits, not only with me right here speaking to you, and I mean that literally, literally. You see, I don't know what literal means, but I think I mean it literally. I don't know whether literal means gross senses, but if it doesn't, I mean it literally. He's not only there, but he's every other place at the same time. Like at the same moment he's digging me eating the biscuits, or, he could be with his 10,000 other devotees wherever they happen to be, because there's no requirement that you have to be only in one place at one time. When you merge with it all, you are it all. You are it all. And we Westerners just can't conceive of what that means, because we're so caught in the finite conception of the way it all works, of our consciousness. Ram Tirth, who was a very, very beautiful Indian saint, very high being. He came to the United States in 1906 or something like that, I think. And then around 24 or 5, when he was about 5, he walked into the Ganga and just kept walking and just finished his incarnation. But he wrote a few lines that are, see, a person like that wrote from inside. So what you're hearing is somebody living in this place. And this is the way he describes the place he's living in. I am without form, without limit. I am beyond space, beyond time. I am in everything. Everything is in me. I am the bliss of the universe. Everywhere am I. I am existence absolute, knowledge absolute, bliss absolute. I am that. I am. And then he also just said these two little lines. I have no scruple of change, nor fear of death. I was never born, nor had I parents. Nor had I parents. Right? While we could go on many hours, and I will be happy to talk informally through the